I have been a fan of AEW for a couple of years, and I think this is a very important thing to talk about. That, one of the big draws of AEW is that it's not like WWE. Like, I like that it's TV 14, and I also like how there are a bunch of different characters, and I always like the underdog element. And then the other thing I like about AEW is the matches, because I like longer matches. I like matches that feel thrilling, and I also like it when wrestlers just show what they can do. Really, like as I said, like when you watch WWE, one of the reasons why I don't watch it is that sometimes when you watch a majority of their matches, it doesn't feel as intense really, or it doesn't feel like two people who want to go a long period of time and show what they can do really. Like there's a lot of just like shorter matches, or it almost feels like to quote South Park, unfulfilled. Remember, we all remember that Amazon song. Somebody bitch slapped the shit out of me. My happiness has been raped and killed. So unfulfilled. It's a South Park song, guys. South Park always has to be, transgressive. But the thing about it is that one thing that has been a consistent controversy about AEW, and I think this is a good video to talk about it, is the length of their shows. Because there are a couple of things that I want to say. That when you do a WrestleMania level show, I have no qualms with it lasting a long time. Once a year, having a 6 hour show is appropriate. But AEW usually does 4 hours or 4.5 hours or 5 hour shows. And that's not good for a couple of reasons. And I also want to just talk about why, but I also just don't like, AEW, like their weekly shows where they do a bunch of overruns. And that's also been an issue as well. So I think that this is a good video just to talk about all these things and just hear what you guys have to say about it. That I'm going to just talk about the pay-per-views. That, first of all, it's good to have a 6 hour show, and maybe like once a year if you want to do that. And then the other thing I want to mention too is that with AEW, they did two things. And the first thing is that I think they said one of the WrestleManias was about 6 hours. So you want to beat a record, that's cool. And then the other thing too is that WWE booked themselves, during All In weekend. And All In was definitely the better show. It was the WrestleMania of the summer. So far, let's do it. SummerSlam. We have to just judge SummerSlam as well. SummerSlam can always outdo it just because they can learn from the show, really. But they really went out of their way. They really knocked people's socks off this weekend in AEW, really, and they had to, because this is the WrestleMania of the summer. This is not something to underlook, really. So when you have a long show, it works because this is where everybody wants to be featured. This is where everybody wants to bring out the best of the best, really. So, so contextually, it makes sense. The other thing about it is that it's okay to beat records, and like I've talked about this before, that WWE had the longest WrestleMania. Yeah, why not challenge that? Because you want to because it shows that you can hold people's attention for that long, really. So it is good to kind of try to go after records. And then the other thing too is that because WWE had a bunch of shows, I think they ended around 8 or 9. AEW kind of said, fuck you, we're gonna have our shows run into that, because it's being competitive, but it's also kind of just being vengeful, a constructive vengeance. Or it's you want to steal my market, and you look at the shows that they've had this weekend, they don't really pair up to AEW All In. So, and then also the reason why they're doing these shows is just to steal some viewers away from AEW, so it's almost like, what, you want to, you want to take food off my family, you want to take food away from my family, I'm going to take a couple of buffets away from yours, or I'm going to show that, or I'm going to show we got it better here, so people are going to give us money so we can feed our families, really, so I get that, and that's the right move. That shows that they are paying attention to the competition, and it's also going to inspire AEW and WWE to be competitive, because we need that. So there's a lot of constructive reasons, but But I'm going to talk about the detriments. That first of all, when I watched AEW All In, I almost felt like I was going through amnesia. I almost felt like I was going through Alzheimer's, and I know these are very serious issues, but it's almost like I had such a hard time remembering the action and the moves. Like it's almost like you know what, like I would like even if you part, and I know this is graphic, but you put a gun to my head, it was almost like I was going through like those two things. Like it's almost like I can't tell you anything that happened. It felt like a huge blur. The only thing that I remember vividly was the John Moxley match. Like when I did my review, I 100% was talking about the last match and how vivid and in detail. And there's part of there is a need for me if I wasn't so motherfucking busy to watch the whole show again and dissect match by match, and I might even do that like chapter by chapter, you know. But the problem is that when you review professional wrestling, unless you're Brian Zane or you have a big channel like Cornette, you know, you can't really like review old content or a show after it happens because you know it's just what's the word? You're not going to get as many viewers really, so it's just not strategically a good idea for me to do that. But the thing about it is when you have super long shows, you lose the audience really because they're not going to remember everything because there's so many things like War and Peace is a 6 hour movie really, you know, like Moby Dick was an 800-page book. You know, Les Miserables is 1,200 pages. Atlas Shrugged, I believe, was like 3 or 4 different books. But the point of it is that you're not going to remember every detail if it's so like expanded, really. So that's one of the big issues that fans walk away saying that it was epic, but they don't really remember a lot because they've seen so much, really. The next thing that I would have to say is that it becomes very repetitive because with AEW, their formula has always been do matches that are 25 to 30 minutes long, do matches where there's a lot of finishers and hard hitting moves, and and also do Dave Meltzer matches where if you had or if it's the Young Bucks, if it's Okada or Kenny Omega, or a few other people, they're gonna do a bunch of like sequences and counters and all that really. So eventually, that gets old really, and if everybody's doing that, it doesn't stand out the same. So I really think that that's also another issue that it makes everything kind of monotonous, and then also too that like I said, if every match feels the same, none of it stands out, and then people don't remember it. I also think that the other thing that you have to understand is that there could be a diminishing return. That there may be some fans that are like, well, like for me personally, I've been to every show from 2023 when CM Punk left at All Out until now, and there's sometimes I hear voices in my head saying, you know what, maybe I won't go to maybe I won't go to O2 or I won't go to All Out in Toronto. Like maybe there's a certain point where I'm like, well, I've been to so many of these shows and they feel like the same formula that I don't want to go to every pay-per-view. Or maybe you may have fans that stop watching because they're like, you know what, why should I be going to all these shows if they feel there's the same formula of drawing everything out really. And then another thing that and I'm gonna cut the line a little bit, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about AEW, their television show, and I've said this many times that it is disrespectful when you have a show like AEW Dynamite or Collision and they have overruns, because it's two things. That if there are people like me who review AEW Dynamite and Collision, and if you have an overrun, I work at 11 p.m. at night. So, therefore, I can't review it. Or, therefore, I have to review it after I come home from work. But the problem is that I work at a hospital. My job is stressful. And now they pass rules where I got overruns as well. So, instead of leaving at 7:30, Byron Andreas is the only employee that leaves at, 9 a.m. or whatever, really. Because of hard worker discrimination, really. So, after... so when you have an overrun with AEW, excuse me, when you have an overrun with AEW, and the show ends at like 10:30 or 10:45, really, I may have to watch part of it at the end of when I come home, or if I'm like really tired, then I fall asleep, and then my brother's home, and it's like, oh well, I can't review it, or like what I usually do is that I would just if I have time at work, I'll do voice to text really, or watch some of the show really. So when you have an overrun, it throws everybody's plans awry really who review it, because they're like, well, people have to wait until the show's over because you can't end it on time really. And I always like equate it to, imagine if you were having a conversation. Now imagine if you need to get into a car, or imagine if you need to leave a room, but somebody keeps on talking, and then you're holding the door, you're more stressed because you're like, you want to be polite to listen to what they say, but it's not ending really. So when you have overruns, it's or when things go on too long, it's disrespectful. It's like somebody not shutting up really. Or it's almost like, as I said, it's almost like going to a restaurant and you have a good meal, and then the chef talks to you for a while, or they say no, try some other dishes on the menu, and then eventually you get to a point where like, I need to leave because you're not respecting my time really. And then when you have super long shows, it's the same thing. It's like saying, okay, it is a little inconsiderate because people have to sit through all this stuff really. So those are like the main points. I think the biggest point is it hurts the quality of the show really, because imagine if you did something like you shortened some of these matches, and then you made Okada Omega long, and then you put that maybe as the opening match, and then you had the middle match be Tony Storm and Mercedes Moné, and then you had the main event be the Texas Death Match. Because one big problem with super long shows is that sometimes the matches that matter the most don't stand out as much, because you're putting it in this like sea of different like things happening. And sometimes you may have matches like the men's battle royale, where you have Anthony Bowens in it, you have Bandito in it, you have Mystico in it, you have Brody King in it, and you have people doing a good job in that match. So it's almost like, how do you build new talent if people don't stand out really, or your new generation doesn't stand out because you put it in a big sea of things really. So sometimes less is more. And like I said, sometimes a good 3 hours or a good 4 hours is a better than an expanded like 5 or 6 hours. So I think as AEW goes further, I think that this needs to be a talking point to a lot of people, is saying, can they work harder on a show as a whole really. Bigger and longer doesn't necessarily mean it's better really. But also, if you go bigger and longer every single time, there is a diminishing return. And then also too, like, and then also too, when you have wrestlers that do long matches, there's a diminishing return. Like, I want to say that I like Will Ospreay, I respect him, but I always use the term a Will Ospreay match, which is that it goes on for a very long time. There's a lot of counters, a lot of finishers, and then there's a certain point, like when he hit Kyle, when he did Spanish Fly off the steel cage, when he did a Tiger Driver on Kyle Fletcher on thumbtacks, a move that hits you on the upper back and on your neck, and then you still go after that. So sometimes what happens is that people just become like Cornette, where they get a little bit more frustrated because they're like, this is just getting a little too stupid. It's also becoming unrealistic, and you just want to put in more and more of your ideas and your thoughts really. So the problem is, like I've said, it could be like, it can turn it into a cliche or a trope really. So I think as AEW goes forward, I think there needs to be conversation that's about long matches, and there needs to be conversation about long shows. I really think that the standard AEW show should be 3 hours, or even like 4 hours maximum, for a pay-per-view. And I give AEW a lot of credit, because usually it's every 6 weeks they have a pay-per-view, and I respect that. They don't do WWE where they do PELEs all the time, or they don't do like back-to-back pay or week, or like sometimes back-to-back weeks of pay-per-views. I'm happy that AEW doesn't do that, because when they do a big show, You want to watch their bigger shows because there's not so much of them, and that's actually a blessing because again, like for example, like Revolution, I like that gap between World's End and Revolution where it's actually 3 or 4 months of no pay-per-views, and I think that's good because you make people miss it a little bit really, and that's good really. But it's like what I've said before, and I'll say it again, is that if you always make everything larger in epics, eventually there's diminishing return. Or even look at what's happened, and this last point is special shows, because that's been an issue with AEW. Because, like I said, you had back to back weeks of 4 hour shows, which is 2 hours of Dynamite, 2 hours of Collision, and you did that in Portland, and then you did that in Denver and Portland. You did that, and then Grand Slam. You said we're gonna make it like 2.5 hours with a bit of an overrun. So again, when you also have special shows or shows where we're going to make it like 4 hours or whatever, you run into what WWE happened with WWE when they made Raw 3 hours. Like there's a lot of fans like me who don't watch WWE anymore, and one of the main reasons why I don't watch WWE anymore is because 3 hours is way too much really. And I think that what they did, if I'm correct, Raw is 3 hours and SmackDown is 3 hours, and then NXT is like 2 hours, and then you have a pay-per-view that maybe 3 to 4 hours. So if you do my Scott Steiner math, that's like 3 plus 2 plus 3 plus 7 really. So that's like 12 hours of wrestling in a week really. And then if you like TNA or AEW or Ring of Honor or things like that, it becomes unmanageable. I will say this, that when I was watching Collision this week, I was mostly on my phone. When I was watching, I chose not to watch Supercard of Honor on pay-per-view. And one of the reasons why I did that was to protect myself. Because I was like saying, I watched Dynamite and I analyzed Dynamite, but I'm not going to care that much about Collision. I'm not going to even watch Supercard of Honor, and I've heard like really great things. I'm not even review it. But one of the reasons why I did that was to protect myself from diminishing return, because I wouldn't want to go to I wouldn't want to go to All In and be like, hey, you know what? I just watched 2 hours of Dynamite, probably 3 hours of Ring of Honor, and then 2 hours of Collision, because that's going to be 7 hours together. And if you count the pre-show on AEW All In, the show is actually 8 hours. So that's 15 hours in a period of 4 shows, really. So, let's call that 16 hours. Let's call that 16 hours if you average them together. Let's do some estimate. Let's do some Scott Steiner estimating. So that's almost like watching um, four 4 hour shows in back to back days, or one day or 2 4 hour shows, and then the weekend being a 8 hours of it. It's just way too much really. So there is diminishing return when you go too long really. And then also too, you want to have shows that go 3 hours. You want to have shows that go like 4 hours and some that go 6 hours, because you also got to give people some variety. And that's one of the good things about WWE, is that they give people some variety. Like some pay-per-views will be 3 hours, some will be 4 hours, some will be like 6 hours, and that's good because you just keep people on their toes really. But this consistent need of long pay-per-views with AEW is definitely concerning. I think that's going to bite them in the end really. So they have to really think about length and make it digestible. But as I said, longer is not better, and then also, as I said, if things are too long or too epic really, people are not always going to remember the good stuff or the high quality stuff because it's just too much to take in at the moment really. It is a controversial take, and as I always said, if people like longer shows, if they make more money from longer shows and they get more attendance and more like pay-per-view buys, then I can just shut the fuck up really. So it is what it is. But I think it's an important conversation to have. So what do you feel about AEW? Do you feel they have an issue with longer shows?